I'm sitting in the radio room at division headquarters, headphones on, midnight shift, scanning frequencies like I've done 1,000 times before, and I hear a voice that stops my heart. It's Thomas, my older brother Thomas, calling for fire support from some island 500 miles away that I can barely find on the map. I recognize his voice instantly, even through the static, even through the fear he's trying to control, even through the chaos I can hear in the background. That's my brother, and he's in trouble. And I'm sitting here in a safe bunker 500 miles away, listening to him die. The transmission comes through on the forward observer frequency. He's calling artillery coordinates, his voice professional and steady despite everything I can hear happening around him. Explosions, gunfire, men screaming, the distinct sound of Japanese machine guns that every Marine learns to recognize and fear. He's doing his job, calling fire missions to support his squad, giving grid references and target descriptions. Everything by the book, everything correct, but I can hear the edges of panic creeping into his voice. The way his breathing is too fast, the way he's talking just slightly too quick. I want to break protocol, want to interrupt the frequency, want to shout that it's me, that I'm listening, that I'm here, even though I'm not there. But I can't, because that would compromise the network, would interfere with his mission, might get more people killed. So I just sit here, with my hand frozen on the transmit key, listening to my brother fight for his life, while I do nothing but monitor. This is my job, listening, recording, relaying, staying silent unless called upon. And right now, staying silent means listening to Thomas without him knowing I'm here. He's been on that island for 3 days now. I know because I've been tracking the operation, even though I'm not supposed to pay special attention to any particular unit. But when your brother is with the 5th Marines assaulting some coral rock in the middle of the Pacific, you track every report, every casualty list, every situation update. 3 days of fighting, 3 days of the Japanese defending every inch, 3 days of Marines dying on beaches and in jungles, and now tonight, Thomas is calling fire because his position is about to be overrun. I can picture him exactly, even though I can't see him, crouched in some shell hole or behind some shattered palm tree, radio handset pressed to his ear, trying to be heard over the battle, trying to save his men by bringing artillery down on the Japanese attacking them. He's 26 years old, 4 years older than me, always protected me growing up, always looked out for his little brother. And now, I'm sitting in safety, listening to him die, and I can't do anything, can't help, can't even let him know I'm here. The artillery responds to his call, confirms his coordinates, promises shells in 2 minutes, and Thomas acknowledges, his voice showing relief that help is coming. 2 minutes. He just needs to hold on for 2 minutes. And I'm counting every second in my head, watching the clock, praying to God that those shells arrive in time, that the artillery saves him, that this won't be the last time I hear his voice. But I know how these things go. I've listened to enough forward observers to understand the timing, the distances, the terrible mathematics of artillery support. 2 minutes is an eternity in combat, and Thomas has to survive every second of it.
Thomas and I grew up in Ohio, small town outside Cleveland, normal American childhood. 2 brothers who were close despite the age difference, who looked out for each other, who planned to run our father's hardware store together someday. He was the responsible one, always had been, the one who thought ahead, who made plans, who took care of things. When our father died in 1940, Thomas stepped up, helped Mom keep the store running, made sure I finished high school, acted more like a father than a brother those last 2 years before the war. We enlisted together in December 1941, day after Pearl Harbor. Walked into the recruitment office side by side like we'd planned, like it was the obvious thing to do. Thomas wanted the Marines, always had, said they were the best and he wanted to be with the best. I wanted to follow him, like always, wanted to stay together. But the recruiter looked at us and said brothers shouldn't serve in the same unit. Too risky if something happened. So Thomas went to the Marines, infantry, and I went to the Army, communications. And we promised Mom we'd look out for each other even though we'd be in different services. Basic training kept us apart for months. His was longer and harder, Marine training at Paris Island, while mine was shorter, technical, learning Morse code and radio theory and how boring it all seemed compared to his adventures. He shipped out first, early 1942, headed to the Pacific with his regiment. Destination classified, but everyone knew it meant island fighting, jungle warfare, the hardest combat in the war. I shipped out 6 months later, also Pacific Theater, but to a headquarters assignment, division communications, safe rear echelon work while Thomas was out there on the front lines. I felt guilty about that. Felt like I was letting him down, like I should be fighting alongside him instead of sitting in safety, pushing paper and monitoring radios. He wrote me when he could, letters that took weeks to arrive, telling me not to be stupid, that someone needed to survive this war and it should be me, that Mom couldn't lose both of us, that he was glad I was safe, even if I wasn't. The last letter I got from him arrived 3 weeks ago, written a month before that because of how long mail took in the Pacific. He talked about the fighting, vague because of censorship, but clear enough that I could read between the lines and understand it was bad. He mentioned his squad, the men he led, called them good Marines who deserved better than dying on islands nobody had heard of for reasons nobody could quite explain. He asked about me, hoped I was staying safe, said he thought about Ohio sometimes and wondered if we'd ever make it back there, ever run that hardware store like we'd planned, ever have normal lives again. I wrote back immediately, told him about headquarters life, tried to make it funny even though it felt hollow, promised him we'd definitely run that store together, that this war would end eventually and we'd go home and everything would be normal again. I don't know if he ever got that letter, if it reached him before this island assault started, if he died knowing I was thinking about him. The mail is so slow out here. Letters cross in transit. You write to someone who's already dead and don't know it for weeks. But I wrote it, tried to send him something good, something hopeful, something to hold on to in the jungle fighting. Now he's 500 miles away calling for artillery support, and I'm listening to every word. And I know that last letter I sent him, those promises about going home, they were lies. Not intentional lies. I meant them when I wrote them, but lies nonetheless. Because Thomas isn't going home. Thomas is dying tonight on some island I can't even pronounce correctly. And all I can do is listen.
The artillery arrives exactly on time. I hear the shells through Thomas's radio, that distinctive whistle and crash of 105mm rounds impacting. And for a moment, I feel relief, feel hope that maybe this will save him, that the artillery will break the Japanese attack, that he'll survive this. His transmission confirms, shells on target, good effect, adjust fire 50 meters north, still professional, still doing his job, but I can hear the exhaustion creeping into his voice, the strain of 3 days of continuous fighting, the weight of keeping his men alive while everything around him tries to kill them. I'm not supposed to be emotional about this. I'm a radio operator. Professional detachment is required. I listen to dozens of units every shift, Some in combat, some calling for support, some reporting casualties. I'm supposed to treat every transmission the same, record the important information, relay messages as needed, maintain the network. But this isn't just another forward observer calling fire. This is Thomas, and I'm clutching the edge of the table trying to stay calm while listening to my brother fight for his life 500 miles away. The second fire mission is closer. Thomas calling adjustments, the artillery responding quickly, shells impacting within 90 seconds this time. I can tell the attack is intensifying because his transmissions are getting shorter, more urgent, the background noise louder, more chaotic. Other voices in the radio room notice. My supervisor glances over, asks if everything is all right, and I nod, because what am I supposed to say? That's my brother dying, and I'm listening to it happen, and there's nothing I can do. So I just nod and keep monitoring and try to breathe normally, even though my hands are shaking. Thomas calls a third fire mission, and this time I hear something different in his voice, something that makes my stomach drop. It's resignation, acceptance, the sound of someone who knows how this ends, who's seen enough combat to recognize when the situation is past the point of salvation. He's still calling coordinates, still doing his job, but there's a finality to it, a goodbye hidden in the professional military language. Fire mission, grid coordinates, and then he lists numbers that I'm frantically writing down, even though I know the artillery already has them. Even though writing them down doesn't help anything, I just need to do something with my hands. The Japanese attack is overwhelming his position now. I can hear it clearly. The volume of fire increasing, the shouts getting closer. Thomas's transmission cutting out partially as he moves, trying to find better cover, trying to survive. He calls for danger close fire, artillery dropping shells within 200 meters of his position, risking his own life to stop the attack. And the artillery hesitates because danger close missions can kill friendly forces as easily as enemy. But Thomas insists, we're getting overrun, drop it, danger close, do it now. And the artillery complies, because when a forward observer says danger close in that voice, you drop the shells and pray. I hear those shells arrive, hear them impacting terrifyingly close to Thomas's transmission, hear the explosions loud enough to distort his radio, and for a moment, I think maybe this worked. Maybe the artillery was close enough to break the attack. Maybe Thomas will survive. But then his next transmission comes through, and I just know, that this is the end. His voice is different, quieter, more personal. He's not talking to the artillery anymore. He's talking to someone near him, maybe another Marine, maybe just talking out loud. And I hear him say, tell him we held as long as we could. And my heart breaks, because I know what comes next.
The transmissions become sporadic now. Thomas checking in every few minutes, confirming he's still alive, still fighting, but each one is shorter, more desperate. The situation clearly deteriorating beyond any help artillery can provide. I'm leaning forward in my chair, headphones pressed tight against my ears, volume turned up as high as it will go, trying to hear everything, trying to stay connected to my brother even though I'm 500 miles away and utterly useless. Other radio operators in the room are working their frequencies, monitoring their nets, oblivious to the fact that someone's brother is dying on the channel I'm listening to. And I'm grateful for that, because I don't want attention, don't want questions, just want to hear Thomas for as long as he's still transmitting. He calls another fire mission, but this time his voice breaks slightly when giving coordinates, the professional facade cracking. And I can hear Japanese voices in the background now, close enough that his radio is picking them up, close enough that Thomas knows they're almost on top of his position. The artillery responds, but I can tell from their tone they know this is hopeless. They're dropping shells to support a position that's about to be overrun, doing their job, but understanding it won't be enough. Thomas acknowledges the fire mission and then adds something that isn't standard radio procedure. "Thanks for trying. Tell the boys back there we appreciate it." And I can hear him saying goodbye to the artillery, thanking them for their support, even as it fails to save him. I want to transmit so badly, want to break into the frequency and tell him it's me, that I'm here, that he's not alone, even though he thinks he is. I want to tell him I love him, that Mom loves him, that he's the best brother anyone could ask for, that I'm sorry I'm sitting in safety while he dies. But I can't, because that would violate every protocol, would compromise the radio network, might endanger other operations. And besides, what good would it do? It wouldn't save him, wouldn't change anything, would just let him know his little brother is listening helplessly while he gets killed. So I stay silent, hand on the transmit key, but not pressing it, listening, bearing witness, the only thing I can do. There's a longer gap now, maybe 5 minutes. No transmission from Thomas. And I'm starting to think maybe he's gone. Maybe it's over. Maybe I missed his last words while waiting for him to key the mic again. My supervisor notices me staring at the radio, asks who I'm monitoring, and I tell him just routine traffic from the island operation, nothing unusual. And he accepts that and moves on because he has no reason to suspect I'm lying. But then Thomas transmits again, and his voice is different now, softer, more personal, like he's talking to someone right next to him, rather than to the artillery network. "Charlie Squad, this is Thomas." He uses his name instead of his call sign, breaking protocol, speaking personally. "If anyone's listening, tell my family I was doing my job. Tell my mother I thought about her, and tell my brother," and he pauses, and I'm leaning so far forward I'm almost falling out of my chair, headphones pressed so tight they hurt. "Tell my brother I'm glad he's safe. Tell him to go home when this is over. Tell him to live enough for both of us." And I'm crying now, tears running down my face, trying to stay quiet because other operators are around, trying to hold it together while my brother says goodbye without knowing I'm the one listening. Then he adds, almost as an afterthought, "This is it. Getting close now. Gonna switch to rifle. Out." And I hear him drop the handset, hear it clattering against something, hear distant gunfire and shouting, and then the transmission cuts to static because he's not holding the mic anymore. He's fighting, and I'm listening to static, wondering if he's already dead. The static continues for maybe 30 seconds, each second feeling like an hour. And then suddenly, the channel comes alive again, but it's not Thomas's voice. It's someone else, another Marine, breathing hard, panicked, shouting, "Corpsmen! We need corpsmen here!" And I absolutely know that something happened to Thomas, that he's down, that this other Marine found his radio and is calling for help. I'm frozen, can't move, can't breathe, just listening as this unknown Marine tries to get medical support, tries to save whoever is wounded, tries to do something useful while everything falls apart around him. Corpsman transmission is chaotic, other voices breaking in, situation reports overlapping, the radio discipline breaking down as the position is overrun. And through it all, I'm trying to hear anything about Thomas, any indication of what happened to him, whether he's wounded or dead, whether there's still hope, or whether I just heard my brother's last words without realizing it at the time. Someone is calling for immediate evacuation, saying they have multiple casualties, including the forward observer, and my heart stops because that's Thomas. They're talking about Thomas. He's a casualty. And I don't know if that means wounded or dead, and I can't ask because I'm not supposed to care more than one casualty than another. The radio net is falling apart now. Multiple units calling for support. The whole operation deteriorating, and I'm losing track of Thomas's specific frequency in the chaos of combat communications. My supervisor is barking orders, telling operators to sort out the mess, establish priority channels, get control of the network. And I'm trying to focus, trying to do my job. But all I want is to hear that one channel again. Hear what happened to Thomas, know for certain whether my brother is dead or just wounded. But the traffic is overwhelming, too many units in trouble simultaneously, and Thomas's channel gets lost in the noise. I keep monitoring through the rest of my shift. 4 more hours of sitting at that radio, headphones on, scanning frequencies, hoping to hear anything about Charlie Squad, about casualties, about a forward observer named Thomas. I hear reports of the island battle intensifying, hear casualty counts climbing, hear units pulling back from untenable positions, hear the whole operation turning into a desperate fight for survival. But I don't hear Thomas again. Don't hear his voice. Don't get confirmation of what I already know in my heart, that my brother died tonight, and I listen to it happen. When my shift ends at dawn, I write up my reports, standard radio logs, frequencies monitored, significant traffic noted, all very professional and detached, no mention that I spent the night listening to my brother die. I turn over my position to the day shift operator, brief him on the tactical situation, tell him which units need priority monitoring. Don't mention that one of those units has my brother's body somewhere in its casualty count. Then I walk out of the radio room into the morning sun, and I find a quiet spot behind the headquarters building, and I finally let myself break down completely, crying for the first time since I was a child, crying for Thomas, for Mom, for the brother I'll never see again. The official notification comes 3 days later. Telegram to Mom. The Secretary of War desires me to express his deep regret that your son, Corporal Thomas Anderson, was killed in action in the Pacific Theater. Standard language they use for every death. Nothing special, nothing personal. Just one more casualty in a war that's killing thousands. I'm listed as next to kin contact because I'm in theater, so I receive a copy of the notification, and I'm supposed to write to Mom, supposed to offer comfort and support, supposed to help her through this. But how do I tell her that I was there when Thomas died, that I heard his last words, that I listened helplessly while our boy was killed 500 miles away? How do I admit that to her or to anyone?
I don't tell Mom about hearing Thomas die. Don't tell her I was listening through the radio. Don't tell her his last words were about her and about me. I write her a letter that's full of lies and half-truths. Tell her Thomas died bravely doing his duty, that it was quick, that he didn't suffer. All the comfortable lies we tell families to help them cope with unbearable loss. I tell her I'm sorry I wasn't there with him. Sorry I couldn't protect them like he always protected me. Sorry she has to lose a son while the other one sits in safety. But I don't tell her the truth, that I was there in the only way that matters, that I heard everything, that I carry his last transmission in my memory like a wound that won't heal. The days after Thomas's death are mechanical. I go through the motions of my job, monitoring radios, logging transmissions, maintaining the network, doing everything I'm supposed to do while feeling completely hollow inside. Other operators notice something is wrong, ask if I'm okay, and I tell them I'm fine, just tired, just worn down by the endless shifts. And they accept that because everyone out here is tired. Everyone is worn down. Grief is so common it barely registers anymore. But at night,
I lie awake in my bunk replaying that last transmission over and over, hearing Thomas say, "Tell my brother to live enough for both of us." Trying to understand what he meant, trying to figure out how to honor that request. I request a transfer to a combat unit. Tell my commanding officer I want to fight, want to be useful, want to do more than just listen to other people's battles. He denies the request, says trained radio operators are too valuable to waste in infantry positions, says my job is important even if it doesn't feel that way, says the best thing I can do to honor my brother is keep doing what I'm doing. He doesn't know that every time I put on those headphones, I remember Thomas. Every transmission from a forward observer makes me think about that night. Every time I hear someone calling for fire support, I wonder if I'm listening to another brother's last words. The work continues. Months pass. More islands, more battles, more voices on the radio calling for help that sometimes arrives too late. I get good at compartmentalizing, at separating the professional monitoring from the personal memory, at doing my job without thinking about Thomas every minute of every shift. But there are moments, always moments, when something breaks through the professional distance, a voice that sounds like Thomas, a unit in trouble calling desperately for support, a forward observer saying goodbye when he thinks no one important is listening, and I'm back in that radio room, hearing my brother die. I received Thomas's personal effects 6 months after his death, forwarded through military channels. Everything he had with him on that island. It's not much. Marines travel light, and most of it was probably lost when his position was overrun. But there's his wallet with a picture of Mom, his dog tags bent from the explosion that probably killed him, and a letter he'd written but never mailed. It's addressed to me, dated 2 days before he died, and reading it destroys me all over again, because he was thinking about me right before the end, was writing to his little brother while preparing for the battle that would kill him. The letter is everything Thomas was, practical and caring and trying to prepare me for his death, even though he doesn't say it directly. He writes about the fighting, about how hard it is, about how many good men he's lost, about how he's starting to think his luck is running out. He writes about Mom, about hoping I'll take care of her if something happens to him, about making sure she doesn't grieve forever, about helping her find peace. And he writes about me, about being proud of his little brother, about being glad I'm safe, even though he knows I feel guilty about it, about wanting me to survive this war and go home and live a full life. If something happens to me, don't let it break you. I need you to be strong for Mom, to be the man I know you can be, to live the life we both deserve. And I'm crying reading this because Thomas knew he was gonna die, and he was trying to prepare me, even though nothing could have prepared me for hearing him die through a radio.
The war ends eventually. August 1945, Japan surrenders, and suddenly all the fighting stops, all the dying stops, and those of us who survived get to go home. I process out through Manila, wait for transport back to the States, spend weeks in transit, feeling disconnected from everything, unable to shake the sense that I don't deserve to be going home when Thomas isn't. Other soldiers are celebrating, excited about seeing families and starting normal lives, and I'm going through the motions, smiling when appropriate, acting grateful to have survived, while inside I'm still in that radio room, listening to my brother's last transmission. I arrive home in October 1945, walk up to our house in Ohio, and Mom opens the door and just looks at me for a long moment before pulling me into a hug and crying. She's aged years in the 3 since I left. Thomas's death took something from her that will never come back. And seeing me home alive, but Thomas gone forever, breaks her again. We stand there in the doorway, holding each other and crying. And I want to tell her about that night, about hearing Thomas, about his last words, but I can't, because it feels both like something she deserves to know and something that would hurt her more to know. The house feels wrong without Thomas. His absence more present than my presence. Every room holding memories of him. Every corner expecting him to appear. Mom has turned his bedroom into a shrine. Everything exactly as he left it in 1941, as if keeping it perfect will somehow bring him back. She asks me to tell her about his death, wants details the telegram didn't provide, wants to know how it happened, whether he suffered, whether he was brave. And I lie to her again, tell her what I learned from official reports, that he was killed calling artillery support for his squad, that it was quick, that he died doing his duty. I don't tell her I was listening. Don't tell her I heard everything. Don't give her the burden of knowing her younger son witnessed her older son's death without being able to help. I tried to readjust to civilian life, try to be normal again, try to care about ordinary things that felt important before the war. I helped Mom run the hardware store like Thomas and I planned, but it's hollow without him. Every decision feeling wrong because I'm making it alone. Customers come in and ask about Thomas, offer condolences, tell Mom she should be proud, and she smiles and thanks them while dying inside a little more each time. I want to scream at them that she shouldn't be proud. She should be angry. Angry that her son died on some island that nobody remembers anymore. Angry that he's gone while I'm here. Angry that the war took the better brother and left the one who listened helplessly through a radio. The nightmares start about 6 months after I'm home. Always the same, always that night, always Thomas's voice in my headphones calling for fire support that won't save him. I wake up sweating, heart racing, still hearing that last transmission. Tell my brother to live enough for both of us. And I lie awake wondering how to do that, how to live enough for 2 people, how to honor Thomas by being twice the man I actually am. The doctor calls it combat fatigue, says lots of veterans struggle with readjustment, prescribes pills that don't help, and suggests I talk about it. But how do I explain that I didn't see combat, didn't face danger, just listened to my brother die from 500 miles away and did nothing? I tried dating, try to build a life, try to move forward like Thomas wanted, but every relationship falls apart because I can't fully be present, can't commit completely, can't shake the feeling that I don't deserve happiness that Thomas will never have. Women sense something broken in me, something distant and unreachable, and eventually they move on to men who can give them what they need. Mom worries about me, says Thomas would want me to be happy, would want me to live fully. But I can't explain that living fully feels like betraying Thomas, like forgetting him, like accepting his death and moving on when I should be carrying his memory every day.
Years pass slowly. The 1950s bringing normalcy to America, prosperity and suburban expansion, and the sense that the war is over and we can all move forward now. But I'm stuck in 1944, stuck in that radio room, stuck listening to Thomas die, unable to fully leave that night behind. I run the hardware store, do a decent job of it, keep the business going, support Mom, become a respected member of the community. On the outside, I look fine, look normal, look like a veteran who successfully readjusted. But inside, I'm still wearing those headphones, still monitoring that frequency, still hearing my brother's last words. I finally marry in 1956, a woman named Helen who's patient with my silences and doesn't ask too many questions about the war. She knows I was in the Pacific, knows I lost my brother, knows something about that time haunts me, but she doesn't push for details, and I'm grateful. We have 2 children, boy and girl, and I named my son Thomas without explanation. Just tell Helen it was my brother's name and I want to honor him. My son grows up knowing about his uncle, the hero who died in the Pacific, knowing he carries his name and legacy, not knowing that I heard his namesake die through a radio and did nothing to save him. Mom dies in 1962, heart attack, sudden and relatively peaceful, and I'm glad she goes that way rather than slowly, because she's been dying inside since Thomas was killed anyway. Just took 18 years for her body to catch up with her grief. At her funeral, people talk about her losses, losing her husband and then her son, bearing up bravely through so much tragedy. And I stand there thinking about the things I never told her, the details I kept secret, the burden I carried alone so she wouldn't have to know I was there when Thomas died. I retire from the hardware store in 1975, sell it to someone else because my kids have no interest in running it and I'm tired of going through the motions. Helen and I moved to Florida, quiet retirement, golf and gardening and pretending I'm enjoying the peaceful years I survived to have. But Thomas is still with me, still in my head, still transmitting that last message, still telling me to live enough for both of us. I still don't know how. I've lived longer than Thomas did, survived to 53 and beyond while he's forever 26, frozen in that last moment on that island calling for artillery that couldn't save him. The nightmares never really stop. They just space out, months or sometimes years between them, but they always come back. Always the same, always Thomas's voice in the headphones, always the helplessness of being 500 miles away doing absolutely nothing. Always the question of whether I should have transmitted, should have let him know I was listening, should have given him that connection even though it wouldn't have changed anything. I talk to other veterans sometimes, men who saw combat, who lost friends, who carry their own burdens, and they understand in their way. But none of them had to listen to their brother die through a radio while sitting in safety 500 miles away doing absolutely nothing. Helen dies in 1998, cancer. And suddenly I'm alone with memories that have no one to share them with, no one to help carry them, no one to distract me from the weight of that night in 1944. My children visit, bring grandchildren, try to keep me engaged with life, but I'm tired now, tired of carrying Thomas, tired of honoring his request to live enough for both of us, tired of pretending that his death didn't break something in me that never healed. I'm 76 years old, and Thomas is still 26, still calling for artillery support, still asking me to tell his brother something, still dying in my headphones every time I close my eyes. In 2001, I finally tell someone the whole story. A young reporter doing an oral history project about Pacific War veterans. She comes to my house with a tape recorder and asks questions about my service, and I start with the standard answers.
the safe details, the surface-level story. But then she asks about my brother, asks how I learned he died, and something breaks inside me after 57 years of carrying this alone. I tell her everything, about being on radio duty that night, about hearing Thomas's voice, about listening to his last transmission, about the helplessness and guilt and grief I've carried since 1944. She cries while I talk, this young woman who wasn't alive when Thomas died, who has no connection to any of this except basic human empathy, cries for my brother and for me and for all the impossible situations war creates. When I finish, she asks the question I've been asking myself for 6 decades. Do you think you should have transmitted? Should have let him know you were listening? And I tell her the truth, that I don't know, that I've gone back and forth 1,000,000 times, that maybe hearing his brother's voice would have given Thomas comfort in those last moments, or maybe it would have made everything worse, made his death harder, knowing his little brother was listening helplessly. She asks if I'm angry at the war, at the military, at whoever sent Thomas to that island, at the universe for making me listen to him die. And I realize I'm not angry, not anymore. Anger burned out decades ago, leaving only sadness and acceptance. I'm sad that Thomas died, sad that he never got to come home, never got to run the hardware store, never got to have children or grow old or live the life he deserved. But I'm not angry, because being angry doesn't bring him back, doesn't change what happened, doesn't honor his last request that I live enough for both of us. The reporter asks what Thomas meant by that, by telling me to live enough for both of us. And I tell her I spent 50 years trying to figure that out, trying to be twice the man I am, trying to justify surviving when Thomas didn't. But I think now, at 78 years old, looking back across a lifetime, that Thomas meant something simpler. He meant live fully, live completely, embrace the life you have because I won't get one. Not live twice as hard or twice as much, just live authentically, without guilt, without the burden of his death crushing my life. He wanted me to be happy because he couldn't, wanted me to have a family because he wouldn't, wanted me to grow old because he'd never get the chance. And in trying so hard to honor that by being superhuman, I dishonored it by being miserable. The reporter publishes the interview in 2002, article in a military history magazine, and suddenly I'm getting letters from other veterans, other people who carried impossible burdens from the war, other brothers who lost brothers, other radio operators who heard things they wished they hadn't. One letter is from a man who was in Charlie Squad with Thomas, who survived that night, who remembers the forward observer who kept calling fire until the position was overrun. He tells me Thomas saved them. The artillery he called broke the main Japanese attack enough that some of them escaped, that Thomas died, but his fire mission saved maybe 20 Marines who lived to come home. And knowing that helps, knowing Thomas's death meant something, knowing he saved lives even as he lost his own. The reporter asks in a follow-up interview if I have any regrets, if there's anything I would change about that night. And I tell her the truth, that I regret not transmitting, not telling Thomas I was there, not giving him that connection in his last moments. But I also understand why I didn't, why staying silent was the right decision professionally, even if it was the wrong decision personally. Radio discipline existed for reasons. Breaking protocol might have endangered other operations, might have gotten other people killed. So I made the choice to listen silently, to bear witness without participating, to carry Thomas's last words without him knowing I heard them. And I've carried them ever since, through 60 years of life he never got, trying to honor his request to live enough for both of us.
I'm 94 years old now. Thomas is still 26, still frozen in that moment on that island calling for fire support in 1944. I'm sitting in an assisted living facility, looking at old photographs, listening to my memories, waiting for whatever comes next. My children visit regularly, bring great-grandchildren who have no memory of the war, who can't imagine a world where brothers fight 500 miles apart, where radio operators listen to their siblings die. They ask me to tell stories about Thomas, about what he was like, about the brother they never met. And I tell them the good things, the memories from before the war, the childhood in Ohio, the plans we made that never happened. I don't tell the great-grandchildren about that night in the radio room. Don't tell them I heard their great-great-uncle die through headphones. Don't burden them with knowledge that serves no purpose except to haunt them like it's haunted me. Let them have the hero uncle, the Marine who died bravely, the simple story without the complicated truth. They don't need to know about the helplessness, the guilt, the question of whether I should have transmitted. They just need to know Thomas existed, that he mattered, that he's remembered 80 years after his death by people who never met him. Sometimes I wonder if I fulfilled Thomas's request, if I lived enough for both of us. I lived 68 years longer than he did, had a wife and children and career and all the normal things he never got. But did I live fully? Did I embrace life without guilt? Did I honor his sacrifice by being happy? I don't know. I tried. I raised my family and ran the business and participated in the community, but always with Thomas in the background, always carrying that night, always hearing his voice in my memory. Maybe that was enough. Maybe trying to live fully while carrying impossible grief is the best anyone can do. The reporter comes to visit sometimes. She's middle-aged now, still interested in war stories, still collecting oral histories. She asks how I'm doing, if I have any new thoughts about Thomas, about that night, about the 80 years I've spent processing what happened. And I tell her I've made peace with it, not found closure, because closure isn't possible, but made peace with the fact that I was there for Thomas's last moments, even though I couldn't help him, that I heard his goodbye, even though he didn't know I was listening, that I carried his words for 80 years and kept them alive when everything else about that night faded into history. She asks if I would still choose the same profession if I had to do it again, knowing what listening would cost me. And I tell her yes, because being there for Thomas's last transmission, being the brother who heard him say goodbye, being the witness to his final moments, that meant something, even if it hurt. He wasn't alone when he died, not completely, because I was listening 500 miles away, carrying his words, bearing witness to his sacrifice. And maybe that's what brothers do, carry each other's burdens, witness each other's pain, stay connected even across impossible distances. This is my confession, 80 years after that night, about hearing my brother die through a radio, about the helplessness of being 500 miles away, about living a lifetime trying to honor his request to live enough for both of us. Thomas died in 1944, calling for fire support on an island nobody remembers anymore. But I remember. I carry his last words. I've lived the decades he never got. I've tried to be the man he told me to be. And maybe that's enough. Maybe being remembered by a brother who loved him is the only immortality any of us get. Thomas is gone, but his last transmission lives in my memory, and I'm telling you now, so it lives beyond me. So someone else knows that a Marine named Thomas died calling fire in 1944, and his brother heard every word and carried them for a lifetime. That's my story. That's my burden. That's what I have carried for 80 years. And maybe now, finally, I can set it down.